Hello, everyone, and thank you for waiting. Welcome. So I'd like to welcome you all, and also thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Decoding Drone Data. My name is Ashrin, and I'm the Head of Growth here at Hammer Missions. Today, I'm also joined by Varun, the founder and CEO of Hammer Missions, who will be presenting today's webinar. So just a little bit information about Hammer Missions. We are an end-to-end solution designed to increase the operational efficiency in infrastructure surveys and inspections by using drones, software automation, and aerial data. Our software helps drone professionals and enterprise UAS programs collect quick and high quality inspection data for a number of use cases. At the end of the webinar, we'll also conduct a Q&A. And if you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the chat window and we'll address them during the Q&A session. I'll now hand it over to Varun.
Thanks, Ashrin. Right, so I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Let's see. Can you see my screen? Right, thanks everyone for joining today. So as Astrid mentioned, you might have heard about us before. We're essentially a company that help you collect high quality drone data for inspections. But this particular webinar, we're going to be looking at drone data, and it's the talk is essentially titled Decoding Drone Data. Before we jump into the webinar itself, I'd love to introduce myself. So I'm essentially an engineer by background. I've been working in the commercial drone industry for the past 7 years. Formerly, prior to Hammer Missions, I co-founded a company called Marble Aerospace, which is essentially a fixed-wing drone manufacturer based here out in the UK. And I also subsequently was working in a drone startup building swarming solutions for a number of different use cases. I'm a enterprise fellow at the Royal Academy of Engineering, who have really helped me get Hammer Missions off the ground. What I want to do today essentially is to share some of my experiences and observations with you in the drone industry. So before I get into the drone industry itself, I think I'd love to talk about another company, another business called McDonald's. So I'd love to put forward a question. What business do we think McDonald's is in? Does anyone want to have a stab at that question? You can pop your answers in the chat. Anyone want to share what business they think McDonald's is in? A real estate business. Okay. Takeaway, eating food. Okay. Fast food. Okay. What else have we got? Any other options? Okay, yeah. So outside of one response on real estate, I think majority of people think that McDonald's is a fast food or takeaway business. And I think it's really interesting to sort of share a little bit more about the McDonald's story. So McDonald's, it's one of those questions where everyone thinks, yes, they are in the restaurant business, they are in the fast food business. But in fact, a few years into being in the fast food business, operating restaurants and cooking burgers, McDonald's realized that actually they could be a much more healthier business if they could own the land on which the burgers cooked. They could actually go into the property or real estate business by owning the land and then leasing that land out to franchisees and charging them upfront revenue for being essentially a franchisee, and then allowing them to essentially cook burgers to their specific quality. And so, John, you're right in the chat to point out it's the real estate business, and I hope you sort of pointed it out for these reasons. The moral of the story here is that it really pays to understand what business you're in. And I think that it's a really interesting point, because a lot of the times we are putting products out there, services out there, sort of providing different things to our clients, but very rarely do we take a view on what business we are in and what do we really provide to our end customers. So the McDonald's story essentially highlights that sometimes having a different lens on your business can lead to drastically different outcomes. So if we accept that premise and we sort of think about the business of commercial drones, we could also take the same lens and sort of like talk and think about what business is commercial drones in. And obviously drones has got a lot of hardware, a lot of kits involved, a lot of different types of specialized equipment, whether it's drones, cameras, all sorts of other payloads. There's also a lot of software involved. As we know, you use software to capture, process, analyze data. There's insurance software. There's all sorts of different platforms out there. And then obviously there's the services to actually provide the service with the hardware and the software to be able to provide an end output to the clients. And finally, there's logistics. So, you know, there's a lot of talk about drones being used for delivery, being used for moving payloads in the future. And I think all of these different things are definitely components of the commercial drone industry. But the key question is, do they represent the heart of the industry or not? And so from my perspective, actually, drones are fundamentally a data business. So even though the industry has hardware, software, services, and logistics, drones predominantly represent a data business. So the data is the product. That's really what allows you to generate value in this industry. And I also say this because a business is essentially something that thrives when it can create and retain a lot of value. So before we go any further into this, I think I'd love to put forward another question in the chat. So we'll just put up a poll, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that poll. So you should be able to see a poll on your screens soon. So we'll give it about 30 seconds for people to answer this question. Right, we've got 20% of the responses so far, 50%. We're waiting for 4 more responses. Okay, got 20% of the responses remaining. Right, waiting for 1 more response. Do you want to have a stab at this question? Right. Okay, I think probably going to end it there. Okay, so that's really interesting because I think, so according to the polls, 78% of the audience today would rather give up aeroplanes than internet search. So it seems like search is extremely valued compared to aeroplanes. And so this sort of like actually brings me to my next point, which is to do with businesses called Google and Boeing. So I think you can look at Boeing and Google and you can try to understand which one of those makes a great business. So, you know, I think from this particular audience, it seems like people would rather give up planes rather than internet search. But I wonder whether people would want to sort of, in a non-pandemic world, whether that's the answer would be the same, whether we would value internet search just as much as aeroplanes. And so essentially the point here is that you can take businesses like Boeing and Google and you can plot them on 2 axes. So one axis being the value created and another axis being the value retained. And Boeing generates a lot of value in the world because it allows people to move from point A to point B. And I think that without that, I wonder if you would be able to have something like Google, because not having planes were a predecessor to Google. And in some sense, Google's is dependent on Boeing doing really well. So from my perspective, I think Boeing generates a lot of value, but it doesn't capture enough value that it generates. And that's because Boeing doesn't actually operate the planes. It only produces those planes, whereas Google is able to provide internet search, but then also provide ads on top of that as a business model to be able to retain the value that it generates. So and it can be really interesting to think of businesses from these 2 perspectives. You ideally want to generate a lot of value, but you also want to retain a lot of the value. So what has this got to do with drones? I think the same question can be asked in the drone industry. We can sort of say, where does the value lie in the drone industry? You know, you can take 3 different examples of a commercial drone job. So you can sort of talk about supermarket, large supermarket roof wants to do roof repairs, and they want to essentially have a service whereby the roof needs to be inspected. The main question there is where is the value essentially? Is it the service? Is it the hardware? And in fact, it's the roof data that the supermarket is really interested in, and drones is just a platform to deliver that data. You can look at an architect that wants to do elevation modeling. We can ask the same question: where is the value? And once again, the value is very much in the elevation data. So they don't really care where that data comes from. They really just want to have that sort of quality data. And the same thing for an energy company that wants to inspect its solar farms. They want to understand the condition of those farms, and they want to be able to do repeat inspections. They want to be able to understand that condition of the assets, and they want to move towards the future of predictive maintenance. So essentially the data once again is in the solar panel data. So if we accept the premise that actually in a drone business the value very much lies in the data, then how do we maximize the value that's generated and retained? So going back to the Boeing versus Google example, how do we make sure that our drone businesses, services, drone teams are very much generating a lot of value, but also retaining a lot of that value? And I think from my perspective, a lot of this really boils down to data quality, because yes, you can generate a lot of value using drones, but to be able to retain that value, you need to sort of make sure that that customer or client keeps coming back to you for repeat jobs, keeps coming back to you for more work. And I think retention of that value really just boils down to being able to deliver the right quality needed for that specific job. So if we sort of say, well, drone data is the way to generate a lot of value, and then quality data is the way to retain that value, how do we even define high quality data? And I think the industry has come to the point, matured enough to the point that we can start thinking about quality definitions. I think that gone are the days when, you know, you just fly the mission and you capture some data and then you process it and you just look at it from a naked eye perspective and sort of see whether or not the data is high quality. I think we've come to the point where we can think about things like quality definitions, and quality definitions could be very custom. They could be very sort of dependent on the business you are in. But essentially it needs to look at a few different parameters. It needs to look at the data and analyze it from many different parameters. So some of the parameters that I've mentioned here are coverage. Can the relevant asset or site be seen completely in the data set? Resolution, what details are available in the data set? How much further can you see? Is the data set structured? Can it be processed? What sort of structure does it hold in terms of overlap, in terms of the altitudes, in terms of angles? Image quality, are the images sharp and well exposed? Can each image be used individually? Does it form a good part of the entire data set? Usability, so can we use the data set easily, and can it be easily shared and consumed? Because sometimes you might have a data set that's too large for you to be able to actually view on a third-party computer or platform. Sometimes you might have a data set that is too low quality to be actually used. So I think usability is a key part of it as well. And finally, repeatability. Can we capture this data again? Because as I mentioned before, you don't want to sort of think of a drone job as a point solution. You want to sort of think about it as something that happens over and over again. And I think repeatability needs to be thought through in the quality of the data from day one. So assuming we go with that sort of a quality definition, I think one straightforward approach to coming up with a quality score based on the quality definition could be, you define all your metrics that are important to your specific data sets. You give them a score from 1 to 10 or any other scale you might prefer, and then you give them a weight. So you can say, well, that's for a specific data set, coverage is more important, whereas for a different data set, maybe the image quality is more important. So essentially a weighted average of all the scores attributed to the metrics could be one way of coming up with a total score for a data set. And then that way you can sort of really say whether one data set is better than the other. And the important thing here is also to make sure that the customers understand this, because what you don't want is the customer didn't really understand what they're paying for and what they're sort of, or if it's not a customer, or if it's an internal team, if it's an internal stakeholder, if they don't understand high quality data, then it will be really hard for you to be able to communicate where the value's been generated. So looking at some examples, so essentially, if you think about a roof survey or a roof inspection, if one of our metrics was to sort of say that actually coverage is a really important thing, we can say that, we can see that there is a data set over here where images have been captured quite randomly and there isn't a proper sort of overlap between images or a proper sort of coverage of the roof in the images on the left-hand side, whereas on the right-hand side, if we look at the images on the map, you can see that this data set is near perfect in terms of what you might be able to see from this data set. Another example is, you could have images out of focus, and again, this would be typically attributed to a low quality data set, but it all depends on how you define the data set. So if it's only one image out of 1,000 different images that you have to collect, then maybe you're okay with the image being out of focus. But if it's a very detailed inspection and need every image to be in focus, then this will probably not be a high quality data set. So essentially, quality definitions and quality scores are really important. And I think sort of starting your drone survey with that in mind, and then having all different stakeholders, whether it's project manager, whether it's the chief drone pilots, whether it's the accountable manager, whether all of these different stakeholders need to be aligned in terms of what you're shooting for. And I think a quality definition really helps you get there, because everyone is making decisions with that quality definition in mind, and then all data is being captured and processed with that definition in mind, and it makes the whole process a lot more objective. So once you've got a quality definition and quality scores, one of the challenges we are seeing that happens is that you might start off with one specific type of data set. So you might start off with doing roof inspections and collecting a lot of roof drone data. But over time, you might sort of start providing services for tower mapping, facade inspections. Over the last few years, mapping and 3D models has been a really, really popular service. Really popular data sets have been collected using this. But I think the industry has diversified into many different types of inspections, many different types of data collection and data delivery. So the big question that remains is, if you've got many different types of data that has been collected, how do you scale your business? How do you scale your services? So I think this is where the first question to do when this sort of a challenge happens is to really consider, should you be looking at many different types of data outputs and many different types of deliverables? Because from our internal customer base, what we're seeing is that actually 70% of the new operators are actually focusing on just one type of data set, one type of use case. Typically tends to be mapping or 3D modeling, but it's essentially a lot of the newbie operators are very much focused on that, and it's only 30% that are looking at two or more types of data sets, two or more types of deliverables. But we also find that once you move into the more experienced drone operator category, we're finding that 60% of the experienced drone operators are actually providing many different types of services, many different types of deliverables, and many different types of data sets. So it's just all about understanding where you are at in your drone services journey, and then sort of making sure that you aren't sort of trying to go faster than you should, and given the stage you're at. So, but assuming you are in the experienced drone operator sort of group, the important thing that then becomes is to understand, how do you standardize your workflow and how do you standardize your training? Because when you get into that mode of providing lots of different data sets, lots of different deliverables, one challenge that happens inevitably is that every customer feels different and every new client feels different, and it becomes really hard to essentially provide bespoke services, bespoke data sets, and then also scale the company. So from our perspective, I think standardization is the solution here, where you very much define your quality definitions for every data set, and then you standardize the workflow around it. So everyone in the organization is trained to do the same workflow. Everyone in the organization follows the same sort of rules of operation. So essentially the takeaway here is that standardizing workflows and implementing the cookie cutter model is the way to scale. So if you are providing many different types of services, different types of data sets, then it's important that you are also building the right workflows in the organization so that it's built to scale as your workload scales. So this brings us to hammer missions. So we've sort of seen this problem happen a lot more in the industry over the last few years, where you sort of start scaling beyond that one or two use case, one or two services, data sets. And our main goal with hammer mission is to essentially help you follow your quality definitions. So if you've defined a particular quality definition for your roof survey, we essentially integrate mission plans as well as data analysis for roofs that allow you to sort of stay on track with your quality definition. And it also allows you to standardize your workflows as you scale, because what you don't want to do is, again, run in different directions when you've got different types of missions. You want to have a standardized platform where you can pick roof inspection for one day, and you can pick tower mapping or tower inspection for another day, and you can essentially standardize so that you have one platform for many missions. And you build consistency that way, and also reduce your overheads, not just in the software, but also your training and essentially your workflows. So the way it typically works in Hammer is that we've got many different mission modules that we integrate into the software. So if on a particular day you are doing an inspection job, you can choose the inspection module. If you are doing another day, if you're doing a facade inspection or a linear mapping, you can choose those modules, and then you can have the flexibility of having them all integrated in one standardized platform, providing you with both flexibility as well as ease of use. And I think giving you the consistency or the peace of mind that the data is going to be consistent across different missions. And the same thing applies for data annotation. So whether it's facade inspections, roof inspections, or wind turbine inspections, we're building everything with the approach in mind that the end user should be able to do any of these inspections through one single platform without having to change their workflows every time they are looking at a new job or a new service. So that's basically it. And I think in terms of our takeaways from today's webinar, I think it's important. I want to just recap. I think it's important to pay attention to what business you are in. Drones, as we think about them, are essentially a data business. We think this because the value in the drone industry is very much generated by the data. To deliver and retain high value, I think high quality data is the way. Scaling a data business requires standardization of workflows, as that's the only way to scale. And we are building Hammer missions with the above points in mind. So last but not the least, I think I would like to leave you with this image. I think our industry is one of those industries where there are quite a few solutions, and there are so many different things that you can do in terms of drones, cameras, software, payloads. But I think it's important to not put the cart before the horse. So it's very important to make sure that we always put the clients and data first, and then based on the clients, the data, the quality definitions, finding the tool that best fits that, and not the other way around. I think this advice is a lot easier to say than to actually implement sometimes. We're guilty of it ourselves, of sort of like putting technology first, but over time we've realized that we want to make sure that we put the customer first and their requirements and their problems first, and then everything else we built right after that. So that's pretty much it for today. Thanks so much for listening. We will shortly be opening up the Q&A session so that we can answer any questions you might have. I believe you also have a poll which should be on your screens soon. And right after the poll, I'll have a look at some of the questions. Thanks so much. Right, so we've got 60% of the responses in, 70%. All right, 90%. That was fast. Okay. I think we're waiting for 10% of the responses. Okay, I think we could probably sum it up there with regards to this poll. Right. Okay, great. So I guess the main question, so I suppose we can probably open it up for Q&A now. So I wonder if people have any questions that we can address. Right, so we've got Jeff. Jeff says, will Hammer missions be providing 3D imaging capabilities in the future? Yes, so I'm just going to take this one live. Absolutely, Jeff. In fact, we are currently working on our 3D, I suppose with 3D imaging, you mean 3D modeling. So we are working on our 3D modeling approach, and we are probably not going to just focus on photogrammetry, even though photogrammetry will be one of the things that we use, but we're also looking at an alternative 3D modeling approach. We have a 3-month roadmap in which we will be launching our 3D modeling capabilities. Right. Okay, so we've got Sekelo who's asking, how reliable is the default terrain follow? Okay, so the reliability is a very difficult one to answer in terms of there's the reliability from Hammer, but there's also the reliability of the drone platform and the data set that's used for terrain follow. So we always say if you've got a great high resolution data set for terrain follow, then the mission will be highly reliable. It all depends on how rugged the terrain is that you're trying to follow and what sort of variations have you got in the flight path. But assuming the terrain is, assuming the data set that you're using for terrain follow is high resolution and the terrain is matches that resolution, then reliability is really high. And we've actually flown quite a few terrain follow missions in different parts of Europe where the terrain was absolutely difficult, really, really difficult. But if you've got a good data set from something like one of the national mapping agencies, whether it's EASA or something else, you can get really high reliability. I'm going to take some of the other questions. So John says, will Hammer missions will be available for Android? Yes, just going to take that one live. Yes, so we are actually about to launch Hammer missions on Android in 2 weeks. So that question's quite a relevant question in terms of timing. So in 2 weeks, we should have Hammer missions available on the App Store for Android as well. It's going to be a limited feature set that we launch with, as opposed to the iOS. But over time, it's going to have exactly the same capabilities as iOS, and it should sync with the Hammer Hub platform as well. So David says, will DJI Mini 2 be supported? So I'm going to take that one live. Yes, so DJI Mini 2 is on the roadmap. There is a very particular reason why we don't support it today, even though there is an SDK for it. It's got to do with DJI Mini 2's firmware. You can only control it whilst you have an active connection with the remote controller. And the way we've built Hammer Mission so far, we've always thought about connectionless scenarios and what happens if you lose connection. And I think that so far we've taken the view that having an active connection to the remote controller is not going to provide a very seamless experience. So we have shied away from it so far, but we hope the DJI will release more capabilities in their SDK for us to be able to integrate more of an onboard solution, which is what we do with some of the other drones that we integrate with. So it is on the roadmap. We're just monitoring what DJI will and will not provide over the next couple of months. Right. Right, so got Jeff with a question on, I reviewed several project data sets that were shared with me by Hammer as examples. How are the inspection images getting colored coded, blue, red, and yellow? Okay, yeah, so this one is essentially, so I'm going to take that live as well. Basically, so all the images in Hammer are color coded blue, red, and yellow based on the severity of the issue. So blue typically means the image that you're currently on. Red means it's a severe issue, and yellow means that it's an issue, but it's a mild issue. So it allows you to sort of essentially focus on the more severe issues by just filtering down all the red tags versus the yellow tags, and blue denotes the image you're currently on. So in fact, I wonder if I could show that quickly, Jeff, because it might be easier for you to sort of visualize that as opposed to me talking about it. So let's quickly share screen. So if just going to go into some of the example projects. So let's say if we were to go into a wind turbine inspection, essentially what you should see is you should see a 3D view of the wind turbine as collected by as collected by the drone, and then you have these red, yellow, orange, and blue dots. So any image that is red, essentially, that shows a severe defect. So you've got some annotation in that image which is severe. So over here, for example, you could have a severe issue, and you can mark that as severe by just tapping that button there. And so that point is now going to be colored red in Hammer missions. If you've got an issue which is not so severe, then it's going to be colored orange. So you've still got issues, but it's not as severe, so you can mark that as orange. And all the yellow points are essentially points where no issues have been found. So essentially, they are essentially just the images in 3D space. So that's pretty much it. And the blue dot is essentially the image you're on at the moment. So you can also see the image thumbnails in a sort of 2D view over here, and then you can sort of sift between all the images. So hopefully that clarifies that. So just having a look through. Is there any other questions? Okay. If there are any other questions, do feel free to send us an email, or feel free to use our forums to put up any questions if you're an active user at the moment. We'll be happy to help out. If you want to try out Hammer, if you haven't tried out Hammer, then you can essentially use a 14-day free trial. Or if you're looking for something more custom, feel free to send us an email, and we'll be happy to schedule a conversation with you. Hopefully this was helpful today, and hopefully this information will help you in your drone services. Yeah, we look forward to speaking soon.